love the fact that it's been designed for both summer and winter. So we've got a south deck area. So in summer up here, because we're new to living in Bendigo, we've got somewhere cool to live. We came from Woodend. And then in winter, we can go up to the north or the northwest deck and get sun all year round.
We were early adopters of the passive solar side of things 30 years ago. And that was Hebel block and double glazing and that sort of thing. And we wanted to step up and sort of embrace some new technologies. Now, we approached our architect, Jos van Bree, at Bree Architects, and we said we want a passive solar house, which was our mindset at the time because that's what we were living in. And through John Burl in Reedsdale, that I believe you probably know, we were introduced to the whole passive house methodology. So being a technologist, having that sort of background, I love I suppose that we've taken that passive solar traditional technology and application and taken it another step further. And that's sort of the marrying of the old style and the new style, and we've got what we think is a pretty sort of state-of-the-art house, particularly as far as passive house certifications go. With the size of the windows, I think we originally had a Nather's 9-point something or other certification, and then they revisited the windows because they were floor to ceiling, and now the house is 8.4 certified. Got into the 9s. But the whole difference between the passive house, rigid, stringent procedures with passive house as opposed to perhaps Nather's, they're very different approaches to, I suppose, sustainable design.
One earlier on in the process, just when the membrane was around the house to check for obvious seals, because it was the first time they'd built a passive house, so the builder wanted to check as well. And then we had one done once all the plastering and the external cladding and things was on. Yes, they found that, they fixed it, and then they retested, and then we got a 0.4, and we need under 0.6 for passive house.
Well, our last house had larger windows than these actually, and we just like the opportunity to be able to bring the outside in. We have extremes of temperature and probably broader variations in terms of cold versus hot. The beauty here is that you have a cold, rainy sort of morning, and usually it's clear in the afternoon, which means you can let the sun in. But you do have to be prepared to embrace the seasons back down in the water.
I just like being able to see out. If I can't be outside, I want to be able to see outside, so that's why I just love big windows. And if it's well designed with eaves for certain times of the year and lets the sun in, it lets more warmth in too, to warm up the sort of the mass in the house too. We were told that we wouldn't need any heating or cooling in the house, but I'm not sure that passive house, that they really know what the Australian climate's like. So we put in heating and cooling. We haven't got a fire, just reverse cycle air conditioning, and we have used it probably 3 or 4 times in this last summer. We'd only have it on, the air conditioner on, for perhaps half an hour a day, and then it kept the house at the same temperature the whole time.
9.5 in panels, and there's a 16 kilowatt battery system.
Are you off grid?
No, it's the house in a steady state because because it's an airtight build. We have to have mechanical ventilation. Nothing stopping you from opening the doors and windows, but at the end of the day, when it's cold outside, you want to close the house up. So the mechanical ventilation controls that whole airflow in and out of the building, with a heat exchange process as well, as you probably know. So the solar side of things is just to supplement our energy usage, but because we've got the steady state refrigerator consumption, the HRV, mechanical ventilation system, those sorts of things, steady state consumption is about 400 watts of power. Now typically we don't actually, because there's only the two of us, all the lighting's all LED, and when we do have the ducted system on, as Joe said, it's only on for half an hour at a time, and it usually brings the house up to a livable state, and it's fine, it's great. It doesn't mean you have to rug up with 3 jumpers on and put thermolactics on and that sort of thing. It performs exceptionally well.
And I'm just trying to change my habits, because I used to always do washing and things at night time when we were on off-peak power, because I had a washing machine with a delayed start, so you could program it, and the dishwasher or anything like that. And now I'm changing to do it all during the day when it's sunny, and I can just use the solar.
We're actually all electric. We were going to go gas electric, and then as we got more and more into the passive house methodology, realised that, and wanted to go solar, that the gas was not only going to cost us more money to actually install, it was going in the wrong direction for sustainable design. So we're all electric. We use heat pumps for our heating, hot water heating. We don't use direct solar heat generation to heat the hot water. It's all done through heat pumps. And the reason being is that it's sort of, if you actually look at the pluses and minuses of both approaches, they're pretty much on a par. And because we've got the solar, the heat pump, as in the solar powered generation, the heat pumps seem to be a better option for us. Insulation is paramount in a building like this. We actually have, and Yoast is probably better our architect to provide better detail, but there's something in the order of R7 or 8 in the ceiling and similar in the walls. The walls are actually a 140 stud wall with a 70mm cavity on one side and a 35mm cavity on the other, which is where all the utilities run because of the airtight membrane. You can't penetrate that, whereas normal penetrations when they've all got to be sealed. So it's insulation is paramount. Because we have such large windows, then we found that to meet the passive house standard, we had to actually put more insulation in the ceiling. Experience from our last building was double glazing, which was fairly radical for a residential build 30 years ago, and cedar windows too, by the way, which nowadays cedar windows and double glazing or triple glazing would cost you an absolute arm and a leg. From experience with that, it's beautiful glazing and does control the weather elements, or gives you that insulation. But as soon as sun hits double glazing, you get the same amount of heat penetration as you do with single glazing. But if you have external shading and effective external shading, it gives you that insulative factor. And that's why we've actually gone with triple glazing and the external blinds. There's a lot of technology in the house. We use, I wouldn't call it a smart home adaptation, but we certainly have adopted some smart home elements. The biggest issue with adopting smart home technologies is that I haven't found one yet that'll actually control all of the devices in the house. And if you can't do that, there's no point actually adopting a full smart home methodology.
So we're only on tank water. One tank up at the shed, and that's 90,000 litres. I hope I've got this right. And the house tank here is 65.
Usable 65. It's actually about an 80,000 litre tank, but because they keep this much for firefighting, it's a usable 65,000 litres. We've got a fairly large dam, which you might have noticed on the way in. That's partially used for our intended uses for watering, external watering. We're also putting in a bore with a desalination unit to provide a top-up. The name for the property is Kangarooranilla, which actually means
place of kangaroos
and plenty of water. Yes. And we've got both. So homestead down just behind you where you are at the moment. And that we'll leave that in our view because that building's over 100 years old. And it's actually the original farm. It's the original farm farmhouse for all the acreage through here.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure that we don't screen that out, and it's just selected planting and positioning, which we'll do over time.
My name's Joost. I'm from Bree Architects. We're the architects of this, which is our first foray into passive house design. This building will be hopefully certified very shortly as to a Passive House Plus standard by the Passive House Institute in Germany. It's really a response to the client's wishes for a really comfortable, sustainable home. And our role in this was making sure that together on this site everything was aligned properly, bringing in the solar aspects, looking at the views, and making sure the building sat nicely in its context. This building really comes out of the location and where the site is. We have our northern side on this side, but most of our views are actually to the west. So it was really quite a challenge to get our solar gain on the northern side, and yet it still addressed the views. So we've done that by trying to close down as much of the western facade and then introducing sort of little portholes and gaps where we can have vistas through that will be minimally impacted by the solar glare and all the heat gain. The shape really comes through the fact that when we first arrived on site, there were a lot of sort of organic shapes here that were very rock-like, and that's where we sort of started in terms of our inspiration for the overall shape. And then really everything else evolved around the sort of function and making sure the solar aspect was working. Everything's sort of designed to keep the sun out at the heat of summer and bring it all in the winter. And together with the passive house principles, the idea is to have a really comfortable house, low energy all year round.